Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are reviewing Fighter, the new Hindi language Indian action film directed by Siddhartha Anand, starring Hrithik Roshan, Deepika Padukone and Anils Kapoor. The film is all about the Indian Air Force, and Hrithik Roshan plays Patty, a veteran fighter pilot, and the film charts him and his team's journey across this Indo-Pakistan conflict. Now, if you've seen Top Gun Maverick, which the chances are you have, and you then watch Fighter, there is so much story-wise that you are gonna take away from that as a rip-off of Top Gun. Hrithik Roshan basically plays an older version of Maverick, this impulsive, hot-headed, selfish fighter pilot who is most of the time looking after his own ego and his own impulses, but is also incredibly skilled at what he does. We find out during the film that he's mourning the loss of a fellow pilot that he used to fly with, Maverick Goose, and he butts heads quite a lot with his superior officers, much like Maverick does in Top Gun. So there's a very, very heavy overlap of narrative conventions and character conventions that seem a bit derived from Top Gun. But for the most part, Hrithik Roshan makes it work. I've said this before, but I do think he is the most expressive and emotive actor I've seen working in Indian cinema, particularly at that level in terms of star power. He's really soulful in his expressiveness, particularly with his eyes, and I think there's a real physical expressiveness through his body language when he dances, or whether he's in an action sequence that really comes through. And it was also really nice to see a film where Deepika Padukone could really get into a character and really show some emotional range, because I've only seen her so far in Pathan and Jawan, neither of which really were A, good films, or B, gave her enough to do. Whereas her role as Mini Rathore really gives her an interesting character arc to work with in this film, and I think provided one of, if not the strongest emotional scene in the film. It was a really powerful scene because of the acting conveyed, and I think they did a really fantastic job of selling it without much dialogue. It probably could have done without the excessive blaring background music to drown out the emotion, but I think for me the strongest performance was probably Anils Kapoor playing Rocky, their captain, their commanding officer. Whether he was having a hard time trying to discipline Patty or whether he was expressing grief and responsibility for this team, he had some really good scenes, and again was just a really emotive performer with the material that he got given. I wouldn't say that the script for this film is particularly fantastic, but because of the authenticity and the rawness of the performances, it does somehow work. Now, if you've also seen Top Gun, which unfortunately for Fighter only came out a couple of years ago, you will know how practical and how real a lot of the aerial combat sequences were. They shot real fighters in the air doing these maneuvers in, low altitudes through canyons, above rivers. And because it's Tom Cruise, you know a lot of this action is taking place in camera real time. Fighter relies mostly on VFX. Now, even if the VFX was stunning, and I've seen a lot worse in Indian cinema, but it is still pretty shoddy and occasionally looks like it's been taken out of Spy Kids, you can't help the fact that it's a visual digital effect. It's not fighter pilots in the air for real. So I wouldn't say the visual stuff landed for me in terms of the aerial sequences. The drama of the scenes was there, but the execution of the visual environments and these planes and backdrops was not. And if it's dogfights that you're watching for, then Top Gun Maverick is the way. But again, thanks to some strong performances, you're not too distracted by it. Like, I could still enjoy this film despite the poor quality of the CGI. This film is also an unapologetic showcase for Hrithik Roshan. There are so many slow-mo shots of this man just walking from place to place, getting out of a cockpit, putting on some shades. The film is really cheesy and just leans into this man's star power. But you know what? I'm kind of here for it. The film has a very ridiculous, corny but epic feel to it, and part of that is because of how much of a pedestal it puts Hrithik Roshan's Patty on. There is a running gag throughout this film that he can just smile and say please a certain way at women, and they will just fall and crumble at his feet, which I feel like is a self-aware joke at Hrithik Roshan's just effect on his fans. But it also gives the film a silliness that I think it manages to get away with because of how fun and over the top it goes. I was even thinking that the film seemed relatively tame when I think back to other Indian big action films that I've watched and how much of a, you know, superhuman they make their main characters, we hadn't seen much of that from Patty. And then the final fight comes and, you know, the superhuman strength comes in. But by that point, you're just along for the ride, as silly as it is. Now, I would say the film toes a bit of a fine line with its central conflict between India and Pakistan. There isn't a real attempt to provide the complexities of war or the history of the two countries. It is very much a black and white, Pakistan are the villains, India are the heroes. So the film is very nationalistic, it's very unashamedly patriotic. Jai Hind is shouted about 200 times. There's lots of shots of people waving the Indian flag and talking about the pride of being buried in a tricolour flag. And then it gets to the end, and as Hrithik Roshan is in the final fight with the main antagonist, who is very underserved in this film. I think the biggest letdown is that he's given nothing but a physical presence to really provide a threat with. The main conflict of the film is over Kashmir and who controls the Kashmir territory. And Hrithik Roshan basically threatens that if they don't back off, then India will just occupy Pakistan. And it's supposed to be this triumphant moment at the end of the film, but, you know, it's tinged quite heavily with colonialism. And you just think, come on guys, let's just leave the colonialism vibes to the West. So the film is pretty heavy India propaganda. And I think there is a way to have pride for your country without oppressing another country. I wouldn't say it would be as beefy if the film attempted to portray this conflict in a very mature and a very compelling, complex, delve into the politics way. But it doesn't. It's very much good guys, bad guys. So I'm sure it will provide a bit of controversy there. It's a whopping 2 hours 40. It did feel like it flew, especially the first half prior to the interval, because a lot of the big musical numbers come in that moment with Patty and Minnie kind of forming and flirting their relationship vibes, and the team just bonding. Some fantastic, fantastic music that really carried us through. Central theme song, again, that just gets overplayed with every single moment. And even the central theme has riffs of the Top Gun anthem in it, but, you know, we're here for it. So the music really popped. I've already got 3 of the songs on my Spotify playlist. But it just brought such a fantastic energy, and I really respected it. At least in the first half, there was a real attempt to sell this group of people as a unit and as a team. Like, before the film subsides into generic action, bad visual effects, India nationalism, it's actually quite a well-formed group of people with a lot of screen time and thought put into the characters, which does disappear in favour of spectacle in the second half. But that being said, it is still probably my favourite cinema experience of the year so far. I know we're only in January, but there is just a vibe and a sense of fun that these films bring to the big screen. And it's the first time I've felt that watching an Indian big budget blockbuster on the big screen. I think it's partly Hrithik Roshan brings a swagger, an emotional vulnerability, and a general charisma all in one. He just feels like the full package performer. His dance moves are unrivaled. Deepika was also like enchanting. It was great to see her in a role that felt more fully fledged and fully formed. In terms of all-round performances, I'd say this ensemble really brought their A games to the film. It's let down by the visual effects, and it's let down by the genericness of the story and the kind of shameless India propaganda. But if it's a film promoting their Air Force, then, you know, it was always going to be. So this film is just trashy fun, but I do mean that as a compliment. I am tempted to watch it again. The songs popped. The cinematography was great, even if the visual effects were not. But it is the acting that I think carries you through this film, and that kind of fine tone between silly over-the-top action and actual rooted vulnerability in the characters that somehow just gels and works. So if you have seen Fighter, guys, do drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's always a huge help for me. And in the meantime, we'll see you for the next review.